Hello, it's time to chat about Season 2, Episode 7 / Episode 14 of Interview with the Vampire. I could not prevent it. In which the Théâtre des Vampires put Claudia, Louis, and Madeleine on trial for violating the great laws. And Lestat returns to tell his side of the story. It's a riveting penultimate episode of the season. Let us take a closer look. Spoilers are coming. Damn, this episode was a bit of a hard watch, wasn't it? With all the torture and suffering on display. We begin with the scene of Louis and Claudia and Madeleine being just captured. They put Claudia in a box of rats. I think they do that to all of them. And then they're brought on stage all dazed and confused. They even cut like their shins so they can't walk. The Theater of the Vampires is all fun and games, but now that our heroes are the victims, it has a different flavor to it. It feels a lot worse. Obviously, the sacrifice of humans on stage was always pretty bad. But we were always on the side of the vampires. It was fun, man. Look at those gross cuts there. Look at those gross cuts. That's not good. That's not good. And so Lestat finally arrives on stage. Nice little silhouette here. So Lestat arrives basically to recount what happened in Season 1, but from his perspective this time, which includes some half-truths, but according to Louis, also some truths as well. And they made a little animation to go along with it. It's pretty cool. Now we know why they stole that colored film. Lestat doesn't even look at Louis at this point. While Armand is caged up in a booth seat, the deal is that he had to turn Louis, Claudia, and Madeleine in exchange for his life. But the whole time he was contemplating how he could save Louis at least. So Lestat continues to captivate the audience. Everyone loves Lestat, of course. He's actually going off script sometimes, which is annoying to Santiago, who is now calls himself the master and leader of the coven. The whole point of this trial here is to make Louis and Claudia look completely guilty. When Louis and Claudia try to speak up and correct the record, the whole coven uses their mind powers to like silence them, you know. As Lestat is talking about his love for Louis during that time, one of the audience members heckles him with a slur, to which Lestat responds by teleporting right next to him and reads his mind, describing how cowardly he was during the war. The soldier should be ashamed for his actions, and not to redirect his insecurities with homophobia. He embarrasses him and shuts him up real quick. I imagine the crowd just believes it's some kind of magic trick or something of him teleporting back to the stage, but also a lot of them are mesmerized by the vampires. This is an illuminating moment here about the loneliness of being a vampire. Lestat describes it and uses his psychic powers really to like make this audience member feel that loneliness, how hard it is to live as a vampire, or a loneliness that humans can never really feel. He's talking about how Louis left Lestat, and because vampires are immortal, that's the worst thing you can do to a vampire, threaten them with loneliness. The audience member is compelled to reprimand Louis for abandoning Lestat. Claudia shows more signs of resistance, but the vampires continue to batter her with their mind control, their mind powers. One of the bigger moments here is when Lestat describes how they turned Claudia into a vampire. He says how he resisted and was trying to convince Louis that it would cripple her, you know, and that he would regret doing this his whole life. Different retelling of this scene from the first season. He puts a lot of the blame on Louis for turning Claudia, and even notes that Louis tried to turn Claudia himself, though he didn't know what he was doing exactly. And then again, here comes the threat of loneliness. Louis begs Lestat to turn Claudia, saying that he'll never leave him if he does so. So in telling this incident from his point of view here, he's turning the tables. He's making himself to be more the victim, more the one who's being manipulated by Louis. It's a really intense scene, and it recontextualizes the first season. Now, to what extent is all this the truth? On stage, Claudia wonders as much, but Louis says it's all lies. But in the present, Louis admits that Lestat's version is much closer to the truth. You know, Louis comes off a lot worse in this version of the story. He's really the one here that's condemning Claudia to this torturous existence as a child vampire. manipulating Lestat with love. But you can also sense there's a bit of exaggeration here that places Lestat in a more positive light, because he's the one telling the story. He's the one performing it. It's a performative retelling on stage, not only for the trial, but also for his ego. It's the recurring theme of the series that memory is a monster. Memory is malleable. It's crafted by the one that remembers it and the one that is telling the story. So the truth really lies somewhere mixed in with all these perspectives. But again, Louis does acknowledge that Lestat was closer to the truth here. We get to another important moment, which is the big fight scene from season 1 where Lestat and Louis beat each other up. When we saw this in season 1, Lestat was the main aggressor. Louis was being thrown around as purely a victim. But here Lestat describes Louis as goading him on. Lestat was trying to hold back while Louis was the violent one. Here he's describing how he wants to chop Lestat's head off and feed it to the lions at the zoo. It's a whole different side of Louis we haven't seen. But again, this is from the perspective of an abuser, Lestat. So for the most part, he's been trying to justify his actions and placing the blame on Louis so far, which has been going along with the narrative Santiago wants to construct here. Santiago defends Lestat for dropping Louis from up high, saying that it wasn't that big a deal for a vampire. For a human, it would surely be lethal, but because vampires are monstrous beings, they could withstand such violence, it's not that big of a deal. But then Lestat starts showing some more remorse and admits that he went too far. It was an excessive thing and he's feeling bad about it. And that upsets the rest of the Coven in Santiago. It's going against the narrative that the Coven wants to establish, that Lestat was always the victim in this scenario and he was being manipulated, and he actually looks at Louis this time. But Claudia could see that Lestat is continuing to be manipulative here. He's continuing to hurt Louis at this very moment by enacting his revenge at this trial here. It's too late, even if some of these feelings are true. But Louis did realize this. He understood that this is just what Lestat does, and it didn't really work on him. He was thinking about his upcoming death. But it was enough to move Claudia to her feet and withstand the mind control for a little bit, enough to point out how hypocritical this all is. Here we have Lestat apologizing for what he did and not being put on trial, while they are put on trial and they can apologize, but no one's gonna care, even though Lestat is here now as well. He's not dead. The Coven shuts her up once again. She realizes that she's not really the main focus here anyways. She's sort of collateral damage for this toxic romance Louis and Lestat have had. Really devastating stuff for Claudia here, and it's going to continue that way. Madeline continues to be out of it, not even fully grasping what's going on, and Claudia makes the observation that this isn't actually a trial, it's more like a stoning. And although that truth bomb quieted people for a second, they got back on track with the film, and Lestat got back on his script, and they continued with the story. And they even show how the Coven contacted Lestat. The reason why they went to the Eiffel Tower was to use their mind powers to send a message to Lestat all the way in New Orleans, who I guess was just chilling, eating donuts and coffee. And then because Madeline is a newly formed vampire, she's given a choice to either join the Coven and save her life, or side with Claudia and Louis and die with them. But even in her days, Madeline stays loyal to Claudia. She declares that Claudia is her immortal companion. That means a great deal to Claudia, of course. She's never been anyone's number one. I mean, maybe for a moment when Louis and Claudia escaped to Europe, but Lestat was always lingering, and Louis would eventually gravitate towards Armand. Claudia has never had anyone as devoted to her as Madeline, and this moment proves that she's capable of having that love. She is worthy of it. So it's a bittersweet moment here, where Claudia finally finds real companionship, but tragically at the end of her life. The audience is gleeful in pronouncing them guilty, but Claudia is allowed to have some last words. In her last moment of defiance, she threatens everyone who has been complicit in this trial. She says she'll haunt them all in the afterlife. And if there isn't an afterlife, she'll still find a way. So I wonder if they'll introduce some ghosts in this series eventually, and we'll end up seeing Claudia back. That would be interesting. And then they move on to Louis, and he's declared guilty by the audience. But when it comes to the sentencing, no one can quite finish the word death. We see that Armand is using all his power to stop all the audience members from finishing that word, compelling them to say banishment instead. And that's how he saved Louis. Armand says he couldn't save Claudia. He says he could not prevent it, as is the title of the episode. I guess he only had enough power to control such a crowd once, and he saved it just for Louis. So Santiago says that banishment is actually a worse punishment than death, because their idea of banishment really is just to put Louis in a coffin with stones so he can't ever get out of, basically keeping him in there until he does starve to death anyway. Claudia screaming out for Louis was the last time he heard and saw Claudia. While Lestat sits without doing much anything at all, I wouldn't be surprised if Lestat claims that he helped with the banishment sentencing. Maybe Armand was only able to accomplish that because Lestat stepped in psychically and amplified the power or something. I don't know. He did show some remorse in this trial. He did seem to have some empathy still for Louis. Maybe Claudia's death was enough of a revenge for Lestat. Maybe that's some wild speculation. So Louis wasn't there the moment that Claudia and Madeline were sentenced to death. This is where the lens they stole in the previous episode comes in. They aligned it with the sun perfectly to shine on them when they opened the curtains, burning Claudia and Madeline alive. This was really difficult to watch. This was hard. I mean, all of us who watched the movies or read the books knew this was coming. And this version felt like an even harsher version of her execution. More cruel because the whole trial situation. But it also gave Claudia a bigger platform. She was able to defend herself. She was able to speak up, be defiant, and stand proud against her oppressors to the very last moment. She actually starts singing that song from that play she was given about not liking the windows when they're closed, which gives it a whole new meaning now. But if they have to end Claudia, and I think it's good that they followed through with what they did in the book. This is a good way to do it. It gives her character a lot more depth and strength. She's actually the one holding and protecting Madeline in this version, as opposed to the movie where it's like the opposite. Claudia is the wiser, older person in this scenario. And with that, Lestat is the last person she sees. She wants to make sure that he witnesses her last moments, witnesses what he's wrought. Part of his reaction here, I think, is a bloodlust for revenge, but I think Claudia's last moments really moved him. There's a bit of guilt and regret in those eyes, I think. At the very least, he's astonished and impressed by the way she chose to go out. And maybe that's partly egotism because his blood is in her, of course. He's the one who made her. Meanwhile, Louis is screaming to get free and probably feels Claudia disappearing, burning up into ash. And as the audience exits, Santiago goes and picks up Claudia's clothing. He's probably thinking, oh, this could probably be useful for an upcoming play or something. And that's the final shot of the episode. Yeah, that was a sad episode. But we're all waiting for this moment to see how they were gonna do it differently than the book or movie. And I think it was effective. It really gave Claudia a lot more presence, a lot more agency. It was respectful of this new Claudia, slightly older and wiser. And in just the spectacle of the trial scenario, along with Lestat's inclusion and his retelling of the events of the first season, really brings the series together in a cohesive way. And the show continues to play with the idea of the unreliable narrator, the nebulous nature of memory, the construction of a narrative, and the biases of its storyteller. It's all so well done. And I'm excited to see how Louis is going to escape. Obviously, we know he's going to come out of there alive. I imagine Armand is going to help him out. Does look like there's going to be a theater fire coming up, though. Though if the vampire Sam is in fact Samuel Beckett, then he's going to have to make it out alive, right? Unless Samuel Beckett doesn't exist in this universe. And we'll see if it sets up a future season. If they're going to continue with the books, then we'll move on to Lestat's perspective next season. And they might even retitle the show as The Vampire Lestat. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think they've announced yet if there's going to be a renewal. But it would make sense to announce it after the finale, once we know where the series is going. I don't know, we'll see. Well, we got one more episode left in the series without any major faults, really. It's definitely one of my favorite series of the last few years. I suspect they'll have a worthy conclusion. Only one more episode left. It's okay. It's okay. There's gonna be more. They're gonna keep making this stuff. It's gonna be fine. We're all good. It's all good. I'll see you next time under the moonlight. Bye bye.